Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me here again today. Last week we spoke about the Courtney Peters case, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it up here for you. But today we're going to talk about the Weimar serial killer known as Cedric Maake. And Cedric is one of those serial killers that are incredibly elusive. You don't know where he's going to strike next. And he also really sticks to the same MO. And I remember watching a TikTok a couple days ago, and this guy was talking about the 5 most dangerous countries in the world. And sadly, South Africa was number 1. And when I was first watching this, I was like, oh no, as a South African, I don't want to believe that. But after reading up about this case and just hearing exactly what Cedric got up to and how many people he murdered, I kind of understand why. We kind of can't get away with why South Africa is ranked number 1. But with that being said, enough rambling from me, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Cedric was born on the 10th of September 1963 in Limpopo, and Cedric was very vague with what he brought up about his childhood. He didn't say much at all, but what he did speak about and what stood out most about his childhood was when he was 12 years old, Cedric then went through the traditional initiation where he was taken and he had to live in the bush for 3 months. And he was completely abandoned here. There was no food or water that he was given to help him survive in the bush. He had to completely fend for himself. And Cedric said that this was one thing that really traumatized him. He said that it made him extremely tough and that he refused to rely on anybody but himself. Then when Cedric was 16 years old, his father passed away. And in South Africa, when you are 16, you are legally allowed to leave school. So that's exactly what Cedric did. He packed his bags and he left Limpopo, he left his family to move to Joburg in order to get some kind of job to help his family. And Cedric really liked working with his hands, so he actually got a job as a plumber. And this is exactly what he did until we fast forward a couple years to when he was 33 years old. Cedric is now 33 years old. He has a wife and 4 children. And also, just a side mention to this whole story, yes, he has a wife who lives in Joburg, but he also has a girlfriend that he visits back in Limpopo. And for some reason, around the age of 33 is when things started to turn for Cedric. He wanted more out of life. He wanted more oomph. He wanted more money. He wanted more power. He just wanted more. So on the 28th of December, 1996, a man named Antonio was busy working in a cafe off the high street in Joburg city center. Cedric, remember, was still a plumber. He walked into this cafe where Antonio was working. Antonio starts making coffee that Cedric ordered. And as soon as Antonio turns around to get something off the counter, Cedric then took out a hammer and hit Antonio at the back of the head. Cedric then robs Antonio of 400 Rand and then he runs away. Then on the 6th of January 1997, Cedric must have run out of money from what he took from Antonio, because now Cedric needed another hit. And Cedric was walking down the streets of Joburg again, kind of looking around, and Cedric notices quite an older gentleman inside a tailor shop. The older man was around 78 years old at the time, and the older man is just sitting there. He's working on some clothing pieces. And Cedric thinks, okay, this looks interesting. He then walks into the tailor shop and he starts looking around and he's looking at pants. And he says to the older man, you know, I'm a plumber. I'd really like you to maybe fix these pants, make it look a bit neater. And I would also like these pair of pants on display. So the older gentleman then gets up, he walks around the counter, he looks at Cedric and he takes out his measuring tape and he starts doing what tailors do. So the gentleman then tells Cedric, okay, I'll take these pants and I'll start working on them. Come back in maybe 10-15 minutes. Cedric's like, no, it's fine, I'll wait in the shop. So the older gentleman is working on these pants and he finishes eventually and he hands the pair of pants back to Cedric. So now as Cedric is reaching over to grab the pants that the older man is also reaching over to give to Cedric, Cedric takes out a hammer with his other hand and hits the old man straight in the face and straight in the eye. The old man falls to the ground because he's obviously taken aback, and Cedric jumps over the counter and starts beating this old man. The older gentleman is now lying unconscious. He's not moving. Cedric thinks, okay, cool. He then jumps back over the counter and he takes 5 other pairs of pants from this older man's shop and then runs away. But remember Antonio, the first gentleman that Cedric hit at the back of the head? Him and the older gentleman did survive, but the older gentleman had incredibly bad injuries to his face and his eye, so he never really recovered from all of his injuries. Now, before I keep going into all of these stories and horrific crimes that Cedric got up to, I do just want to let you know that this is just an incredibly long list of crimes that Cedric committed. So maybe if you want to go grab something to eat or get something to drink, because there is just a lot of information coming your way. So after these 2 attacks, Cedric is maybe absolutely loving the power, because only 2 days after he had horrifically beaten this older gentleman in a tailor shop, Cedric does it again. Cedric now walks into a butchery, and just like he did with Antonio, there's a young gentleman who's working the front counter area. As soon as this young man turned around and he grabbed a piece of meat from the butcher rack thing, Cedric then turns around and smacks the young man at the back of the head. This young man fell straight to the floor. He had very bad brain damage at the back of his head, but he did survive. Cedric ended up just stealing money from the till and he ran off again. Then on the 17th of January 1997, Cedric walked into another tailor shop where a 56-year-old man was busy working. And just like before with the previous tailor, Cedric walked into the shop and he said that he needed his pants altered. So the man looks at his pants, he's busy measuring him, and he says to Cedric, cool, I can definitely do this for you. Then Cedric actually takes the hammer off of his belt, puts it in front of the 56-year-old man's face, and says, hey, my hammer's really loose. Is there maybe a hardware store that I can go and fix this at? The gentleman then tells Cedric, oh yeah, you can go up the road. There's a hardware store right there. They can fix it up right away. So Cedric leaves the tailor, and then he heads over to the hardware store. He gets his hammer fixed and he comes back to the tailor where the man's now finished with his pants. The tailor then tells him to fill out the form and put his name and surname there, which he does, but it's obviously completely fake. So Cedric takes his pants all neatly folded, he grabs it, and then he's about to leave. But as he's about to leave, he points over to some underwear on the rack that he really likes, and he says to the gentleman, I'd like to look at those, please. So the gentleman then grabs the pair of underwear, and as he's doing so, Cedric then hits him at the back of the head again with the hammer. But for some reason, Cedric actually left the hammer at the scene of the crime this time. So this incident happened on the 17th of January. Now we're going to fast forward to the 22nd of Jan. And Cedric did the exact same thing. He walked into another tailor shop, pulled out a hammer, and hit another man at the back of the head. Thankfully, this gentleman also survived, and Cedric just walked away with his wallet and money and any other valuables in the shop. Now, sadly, not all of Cedric's victims would survive, hence why he's called a serial killer. And the next day after he attacked someone on the 22nd, the 23rd of January 1997, Cedric walked into another shop owned by a gentleman called Mr. Patel, and once again, Cedric struck the man at the back of his head. The man collapsed on the floor, absolutely shocked at what just happened. Cedric then continued to beat Mr. Patel in the face with a hammer. He then stole Mr. Patel's money and any of the cash that was in the till. Mr. Patel was rushed straight to hospital and sadly he did not make it. He succumbed to his injuries. In the month of February 1997, Cedric went on to attack another 2 men, also with hammers, also at the back of the head. Luckily both survived. They were just robbed of their money. Now I could go on for quite a while about how many people Cedric attacked with a hammer, but Cedric ended up committing 11 different crimes with the hammer in tailor stores, butcheries, shoemakers, and in total he claimed 1 life from these attacks. But because Cedric was moving around different areas of Joburg, he was in different jurisdictions, so the police were not connecting 2 and 2 together. So after Cedric had committed a lot of crimes using a hammer, he then moved on to a different type of MO, and he moved on to a place called Wemapan. Wemapan was an area that a lot of couples would go to, families would go to, and was a recreational area with a massive lake. So on the 27th of April 1997, Cedric was now lurking around the Wemapan area, and he came across a couple named Elijah and Eunice. Eunice and Elijah were a young couple. They were enjoying the sun. They were just having a really nice time, and then they got back up into Elijah's car, where they were then sitting, holding hands, kissing, those kind of romantic things. But remember, Cedric is still lurking. He's watching this couple and he's watching their every move. But what Cedric is very interested in is Elijah's car. Cedric then walks up very quietly. He then walks towards the driver's side of the car. He then angles himself perfectly that he shoots Elijah twice at the back of the head. He then reaches into the car and takes Elijah's wallet. He tells Eunice to get out of the car via gunpoint. He then pushes the gun into her back and walks her to a nearby mine dump, where he then shoots Eunice as well, also killing her. And when police did get to the scene at a later stage, there was no clear evidence whether Cedric had had his way with her or not. But when police did come to the scene and they noticed that there were 2 victims and that one was Elijah, They ended up going to Elijah's family to let them know that their son or brother had passed away. And when they knocked on Elijah's front door, his wife actually answered the door, and that must have been an even harder pill to swallow, that not only had her husband passed away, but that he was with another woman at the time. Then a month later, on the 25th of May 1997, Cedric got into a taxi and he made sure that he sat all the way at the back and that he was the last person to get off the taxi. He then told the taxi driver that he wants to get off at the Wemmer Pan area and that he must just drop him off there. The taxi driver then stops, he pulls over and he lets Cedric out. But as Cedric gets out, he walks around quickly to the driver's side of the car. He then pulls a gun at the taxi driver's face. He then takes 300 Rand from the taxi driver and he also shoots him multiple times. But luckily the taxi driver did survive. Then a couple weeks later, a 49-year-old man named Rolf and a 42-year-old woman named Christina were sitting on the grass at Wemmer Pan. They were having a romantic date when Cedric then walks straight up to the couple, walks up to them from behind and shoots Rolf twice in the back of the head. And this is the middle of the day. This is the middle of a recreational park. The person who noticed the crime ran over to the couple as soon as he saw Cedric leave, and he noticed that Rolf was still clinging barely to life. And an ambulance was called and they came incredibly quickly, but sadly when they got there, Rolf did pass away. And then they walked a couple of meters forward, and sadly they also found Christina's lifeless body as well. Sadly, Cedric had his way with Christina, and he also then afterwards shot her to death. On the 16th of June, a lady named Dora was busy jogging down the Soweto highway when Cedric noticed her. Cedric then approached her from behind. He grabbed her arm and held the gun straight into her back and started shouting at her. He then dragged this young lady into a nearby bush where he then had his way with Dora. After Cedric was done, he then got up and shot and killed Dora. Then, on the 21st of June, a man named Santi was busy walking with two of his female friends. They were all walking back home, and they were just coming from a college that was quite nearby. Cedric then walked up to the three of them quite casually. He started a random conversation until all of a sudden things just snapped. He then pulled out a gun at Santi and then he shot him in the stomach twice. Sadly, Santi did pass away on the scene, and the two women that he was with ran for their lives and they managed to get away. Santi only had 20 Rand on him, his ID book. Cedric took all of it. He took his ID book, he took his 20 Rand, and he also took Santi's shoes. Then on the 11th of July, Cedric then returned to Wemmer Pan, where a man named Jerry and his girlfriend Charlotte were enjoying their day at the park. They were sitting in Jerry's car when Cedric approached the couple from behind. Cedric then tapped on Jerry's window and he asked Jerry, "Can you just help me with my cell phone? I'm trying to look for something but I really can't find it." So Jerry then winds down his window, and as soon as he does, then Cedric sadly shoots Jerry twice. Jerry dies almost instantly. Cedric then takes Jerry's wallet and then takes Charlotte out by gunpoint. He also then pistol whips Charlotte. Cedric then forces her to walk a couple meters where he then has his way with her. But once he's done, he then takes her jacket, her shoes, but then he gives her some money so that she can get a taxi home. And before she's about to get up and run away, he then says to her, "Do you maybe want to go on a date anytime soon?" And Charlotte's just absolutely shocked. She just continues to run away. But then Cedric all of a sudden understands, like, okay, this woman's actually running away. She's going to go to the police. So he starts chasing after her, and luckily she manages to wave a taxi down. The taxi stops. Charlotte gets in the taxi just in time to slam the door in Cedric's face, and the taxi driver just speeds away because he knows something's not right. And the very next day, after killing Jerry in the park, he returns to Wemmer Pan, where a 35-year-old man named Moses and a 26-year-old woman named Dorcas were just having a picnic. They were just enjoying their time when Cedric just walks up to the couple again and shoots Moses twice in the back, and sadly Moses dies instantly as well. Cedric then steals Moses' wallet and then tells Dorcas to walk to a nearby tree where he then has his way with her as well. But after Moses' murder, obviously the bodies in Wemmer Pan were piling up. So after that, the Wemmer Pan series was coordinated and all of the investigations were placed under the Brixton Murder Unit, and this investigation was headed by Captain Pete Bielefeld. And we've spoken about Pete Bielefeld quite often in some of our crime stories. And he was known as one of South Africa's best detectives because he had a 99% solve rate. But sadly, Captain Bielefeld did pass away in 2017 from a short battle of cancer. Then 4 days after the whole incident with Dorcas, Cedric was actually back at Wemapan again, where a 26-year-old man named Stanley and his girlfriend Emily were parked sitting in a car, where Cedric then walked up from behind again and held them up at gunpoint. Stanley and Emily is a bit different to all the others because he asked Stanley and Emily to get out of the car and then to have sex with each other, while Cedric just watched. Then once the couple were finished, Cedric then proceeds to rob both Stanley and Emily, but Stanley actually gets up and he starts running for it, and he left Emily alone there with Cedric. And because Emily was now alone, Cedric then proceeded to beat Emily, and he then unfortunately also had his way with Emily. Emily was shot and beaten, but luckily she survived. Then on the 18th of July 1997, this day was absolutely crazy because Cedric ended up killing 5 people in the same day. Cedric's first victims on this day was a man named Samuel and his girlfriend Catherine, who were both 25 years old at the time. They were walking along an edge of water when Cedric approached them and he tried to rob them. Samuel put up a fight. He tried to defend Catherine as well, but sadly he was shot by Cedric, and he was shot in the head 3 times. Cedric then proceeded to shoot Catherine in the knee, where I assume he didn't want her to run away because he then dragged her into a nearby bush, where he then had his way with Catherine as well. After he was done with Catherine, he luckily left her alone after that. She survived. But then Cedric started running to the Claremont area, and he came across a couple named David and Sarah. Cedric ran up to David. He said, "I want your shoes, give me your shoes." David was first taken aback, and David was kind of a big guy. He was bigger than Cedric, so he wanted to put up a fight. But as soon as he went for Cedric, he was shot and killed. Just like he did to most of the other women, Cedric then pulled Sarah into a bush nearby and had his way with her as well, before he then got up and shot Sarah to death. And while Cedric was still in Claremont, maybe not even an hour to 2 hours after he had just murdered David and Sarah, he then finds another couple, who was Martin, 19 years old, and Lilanli, who was 15 years old at the time. They were just walking home and they just kind of stopped to just talk to each other when Cedric then approached them. He walked straight up to Martin, remember only 19 years old, shot him at the back of the head, then dragged Lilanli into the bush to have his way with her. And after he was done, he then shot and killed her and took her clothing. And I don't think that I've ever had such a long list of crimes to go through, and we're not even anywhere near done. So from August 1997 to around the 12th of December 1997, Cedric went on and attacked people, once again with hammers, in the city of Joburg. He would go back to tailors, back to shoe repairsmen, back to butchers, those kind of shops. And in that time period, he managed to attack 23 different people. 10 of those 23 people were murdered, and at least 7 of them Cedric had his way with. Now finally, police started noticing, okay, we kind of have a pattern, there's kind of a lot of crime going on. Someone is clearly attacking the tailors and we need to do something about it. So the police then decided to set up surveillance in a lot of the tailor shops that were around the area. But the tailoring community, the butchers, the shoe repair people, they were not impressed with just surveillance being in the area. They wanted to make sure the guy was caught. So instead of just waiting for police to do their thing, the community then went to the media and they told the media that surveillance is going to be in the area. And Cedric was watching this news story and he now knew that the police were on him. So because Cedric knew the police were on him, he now felt that he was backed up in a corner, and he now felt that he needed to change things up in order not to be caught. So going from hammer killings to shootings to now home invasions. And soon after that news story was leaked, or Cedric had seen a news story, a man named Jose was stabbed to death in his home near Regent Park, and Cedric stole his TV, his video recorder, his wallet, shoes. Then on the 7th of November, a man named Arthur was also attacked in his home and beaten to death with a hammer, and Cedric stole also his video machine, jewelry, clothes, and a revolver. And these were included in some of the 23 crimes that Cedric went through from August to December. So not only did he do the hammer killings and the shootings, but also these home invasions. But like I said, these are the types of crimes that were going on between August and December. And Captain Bailiffalt was absolutely obsessed with these crimes and with trying to see who was doing all of this. He would go to the crime scenes often. He would come back and forth between them looking at photos just to see if he was missing anything. And all of this diligent looking at the crime scene and fingerprints and everything was actually paying off. Captain Bailiffalt went back to one of the crime scenes. He noticed a piece of tissue that was lying near where a victim said she had been assaulted by Cedric, and Captain Bielefeldt was able to take some DNA from it. Captain Bielefeldt was also going to all of the victims who had reported crimes of any type of sexual nature to the police, and he then went to them, he asked them to describe their attacker, and also he took DNA from them. And a lot of the women described the attacker as small built but strong and also very aggressive. A lot of the women all had the same story where the man would chase them and shout at them in Afrikaans. Cedric would also brag to his victims about how many he had murdered and exactly what he had done. And because of this, Captain Bielefeldt was slowly collecting DNA, but he was also slowly collecting information. Then quite randomly in late December, Captain Bielefeldt was working quite late, and he happened to get a random phone call. Someone from the public had managed to get hold of Captain Bielefeldt to let them know that a strange man was busy lurking around a local hotel. This person said that the lurker never ate there, he never slept there, he just watched. But this person said the person lurking around was not poor, he was not looking for money, he was just lurking. And this description that the person said this random lurker looked like fit the Wemapan victim's description exactly. The person who phoned in said that he was small, he was very thin, but he also had very neat green trousers that he wore and a very neat jersey on as well. The caller also said that he may be in a relationship with someone in the hotel and that's why he keeps lurking around, but she wasn't exactly sure either. So Captain Bielefeldt got straight into his car, he headed down to the hotel, but what they made sure is that the person who called was not to let the girlfriend or parent girlfriend of this lurker know that they were coming. While Captain Bielefeldt and the other police were busy doing surveillance on this random lurker, they did find out that he was actually dating someone who worked near the hotel, and her name was Angelina, and she worked at a local dog parlor shop. So the surveillance team would watch Angelina go home and come to work, and that night was no different. They followed Angelina home, and then on the morning of the 23rd of December 1997, they followed Angelina back to work, and she was waiting at a railway station to get onto the train to get to work when a man then approached her and they started hugging, and police then ran for it, and they then took Cedric Maake into custody. The police saw that he was wearing green trousers and a very neat jersey, and he also had a single bullet in his pocket. But Cedric refused to say anything. He was keeping quiet completely. The police took blood samples from Cedric as well as saliva samples, and the forensics team at the South African Police Force worked throughout the night and throughout Christmas in order to get the DNA results. And I'm sure, as you guessed, the DNA matched perfectly. But remember, Cedric was only their man for the Wemapan murders. No one had linked the Taylor killings to the Wemapan murders at all. And Captain Bielefeldt said that when Cedric was taken into custody and put behind bars, he said that Cedric turned into an absolute nightmare. He was screaming, he was flinging feces at the police, and he was just shouting incredible profanity at everybody. Captain Bielefeldt then took Cedric out of the prison cell and took him to an interrogation room, and he asked Cedric point blank, why does your DNA match the crime scenes with almost all of the Wemapan murders and Wemapan victims? And Cedric just smiled at Captain Bielefeldt and said, well, obviously they would match because I'm the Wemapan killer. The police then took Cedric to the Wemapan area, and Cedric pointed out exactly where and what he did at each spot, and he was very open with all of his crimes and kind of bragging to Captain Bielefeldt about what he'd done. But obviously Captain Bielefeldt was fine with him bragging about it because he was letting the cat out of the bag. Cedric said that he would take all the clothes, the jewelry, and everything that was based on women's stuff, and he would give this to his mom. So while Captain Bielefeldt was trying to figure out who Cedric was, he learned that early on in Cedric and his wife's marriage, Cedric's wife was actually very unfaithful to Cedric, and she would often go to the Wemapan area to have a rendezvous time and to meet up with these men that she was dating. And maybe that's the connection between Wemapan and Cedric. So Captain Bielefeldt still had no idea about the Hammer murders. He hadn't linked them yet until one day he was going over the case files of the Wemapan murder, and he noticed that one of the victims that Cedric had admitted killing, Cedric said that he took the victim's bike and sold it to a pawn shop. So Captain Bielefeldt, on a hunch, went to this pawn shop, looked at the name who apparently Cedric used in order to sell this bike, and Cedric used the name Patrick McQuenna. And Captain Bielefeldt said this name is really, really familiar. So Captain Bielefeldt goes back to the office and he's looking through the Hammer killings, and he notices that someone had used Patrick McKenna as well to sign in for their pants after someone had been murdered at that exact tailor store. And it's at that moment that Captain Bielefeld linked 2 and 2 together, and he said that he's now dealing with a super killer. When Captain Bielefeld actually brought up the hammer killings with Cedric, and if he was actually linked, Cedric was like, yeah, I am the hammer killer as well. Didn't you guys figure that out yet? And Captain Bielefeld was like, oh, you are? Keep going. Why did you kill the tailors? What was it with the tailors that fascinated you or upset you so much? And Cedric said that the reason that he attacked tailors was because one day he actually took his work pants to a tailor and they messed up so badly that he just got so irritated that he had to kill him. And the reason he would keep going back to tailors to fix his clothes was because the woman that he had his way with would end up ripping the clothes, and he always liked to look neat. So these women trying to defend themselves and ripping his clothes was a no-no. They can't do that. He must look neat. Don't be so disrespectful. And eventually Captain Bielefeld was able to link everything perfectly together, and he then took Cedric Maake to trial on 133 different charges. Cedric Maake's trial started in April 1998, and it lasted for 355 days. And it took so long because of all the surviving victims who testified. The victims who sustained a lot of brain damage didn't have to testify everything that happened. They just had to say their name, roughly where they got hit, like was it on this side of the head or was it on this side, and where did Cedric hit you? And on the 16th of March 2000, Cedric Maake was found guilty of 27 counts of murder, 26 counts of attempted murder, 41 counts of robbery with aggravating circumstances, 1 count of attempted robbery, 14 counts of rape, 1 count of assault with grievous bodily harm, 3 counts of illegal possession of a firearm, and 1 count of illegal possession of ammunition with a single bullet they found in his pocket. Cedric Maake was then sentenced to 1,835 years in prison, plus 3 months for that random bullet that they found in his pants when he was meeting Angelina. I assume we are safe to say that Cedric will spend the rest of his life behind bars, which is where he definitely deserves to be. When trying to figure out what to say to try and end this case, I was actually speechless because I just can't fathom how many people Cedric had murdered in such a cold and callous way. How many times he had walked up behind someone and shot them in the head, or while the couple was just kissing and cuddling, he just, I don't know, I have no words to end this case. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you are just as shocked for words as I am. Please stay safe out there, don't talk to strangers, and I will see you again next week. Bye.